people of a certain generation, Playboy's Hugh Hefner was a cultural icon of the 60s who played a pivotal role in leading America and indeed the world out of the conservative, sexually repressed dark ages and into a new glamorous world of free love for all. He's buried next to Marilyn Monroe. I actually know that very spot where he is.
I remember him reminding me constantly, you know where I want to be buried. I don't care about anything else. I won't be here, but make sure that's where I'm buried. She didn't have a say who was buried next to her for all eternity. She also didn't have a say when he bought her calendar photos and put her in the first issue of Playboy. She got paid nothing. And that's what created the brand. So he's been using and abusing women since day one.
Using and abusing Marilyn by the sound of it.
Absolutely.
Even after death.
I feel sorry for her.
Having to reside forever next to him.
Yes.
So my argument in the book is basically that there are some really important ways in which men and women are different from one another. So some of those differences are physical, and also there are psychological differences, which a lot of feminism of the last half century or more has been really invested in minimising, but are, I think, definitely there if you look at the research. And if also you just look at the world around you. One of those differences, for instance, is that male sexuality is different from female sexuality on average, that men are more likely to be into things like casual sex, watching porn, buying sex, all things that have become much more socially acceptable post-sexual revolution. And my argument basically is that the sexual revolution was kicked off by the pill, and which did a pretty good job of severing the link between sex and reproduction, and kind of gave the impression that sex could just be a leisure activity, that it didn't have to mean anything, it could just be sort of a bit of fun. And my argument is actually that idea that sex is just a bit of fun, it doesn't really mean anything, suits male interests much more than it does female, because casual sex in particular is just one, men want it more than women do, and two, women carry all of the risks associated with it, like physical risks like pregnancy and violence and so on. So my argument basically is it's a bad deal. The popular narrative that I'm challenging is one that the sexual revolution was like a feminist accomplishment, and I don't think that's true. It's not to say that like everything is like the battle of the sexes, women are like losing across the board, not at all. But I think in terms of sexual culture, that I'm concerned that women now can be much more open about sexuality and are more able to enjoy sex in certain circumstances and stuff. That's true. But I also think that to some extent, like, we're social animals and we're very responsive to norms. And what I think has happened is kind of the norms have just spun on a sixpence. And now, whereas previously it would have been the case that young women, for instance, were like protecting their virginity and their reputation for being chaste and so on was considered very important socially. Now, if anything, it's the opposite, or not quite the opposite, but that now the pressure actually is on for women to be up for it and to be just as like sexually adventurous as the guys. Like, yeah, it is in the interests of men who want to sleep around to encourage women to match them, you know, in that kind of behaviour. So that's clearly going on at an individual level. But then in terms of like women's magazines encouraging their readers to do the same, I did a lot of digging through women's magazines for this book, and like there are some really grim articles out there. I can't remember exactly the wording of it, but there's a whole genre of articles in women's media about encouraging women not to catch feelings. Or, I mean, the way that it's phrased is how anyone of any gender cannot catch feelings when they're having casual sex, and how to have casual sex in like a fun feminist way, etc., etc. But like, we know that women are much more likely to bond quickly with their sexual partners. We know that they're just much less likely to like casual sex. Something that's a really interesting and really marked difference between men and women on average in sexuality is women's sexual disgust threshold is a lot lower. So women will get the ick much easier than men will. But if you're going to participate, if you're going to have sex like a man, you have to overcome all of those instincts, right? And so there's this whole genre of women's mags that will basically like instruct their young readers in how to suppress their instincts and have sex that actually they kind of know deep down they shouldn't be having, which I think is really bleak. And yeah, and I think that just representing that as feminist in any way.
Interestingly, looking at it from a man's perspective, I agree that this is bad for women. I don't think that it serves their interests. I think that the biological predisposition that women have when it comes to sexual partners, trying to decouple having sex. First off, having sex and making babies was decoupled, but then having sex and having emotions, getting attached, was decoupled. And that second one, the pill for that is, I mean, you know, what is it? It's 10 vodkas deep? Like, does that really help?
So I want to read some of these texts from you to a friend between the two of you before you met Trevor, this one. Next victim, star pitcher for the Dodgers. Okay. Victim is an interesting choice of words. I'm going to allow you a chance to explain yourself. But after you agreed to meet, you asked your friend what you should steal. Your friend answered his money. He says, another one from you to a friend, I'm going to his house Wednesday. I already have my hooks in. You know how I roll. Your text, need daddy to choke me out, being an absolute whore to try to get in on his 51 million. You say this wasn't a setup. How can you expect anyone to believe that?
That's a great question. I really appreciate you having me on to even have this conversation. Obviously, there's a lot going on around this, so I really appreciate people who are asking questions about it.
You're saying that it's misleading because you're admitting that you did talk about rough sex and wanting rough sex. You did talk about him needing to choke you out. You did talk about stealing his money, but it's misleading because he put them together in the same video as if you had said it in the same conversation when in fact it was separate conversations, correct? That's why it's misleading?
Correct.
So you said in court that he sexually assaulted you on 2 different encounters, and you say the first time that you say he choked you unconscious. Clearly the insinuation is you didn't like it, because now you're calling it an assault. But why did you make the drive back to LA to meet back up with him a second time if this man had just assaulted you by your own account?
It's a really good question. How I phrased it and how I in the past is that I was so embarrassed by the first encounter that I felt something, deep in me to go and take the power back and to be better and to be what he wanted in a sense. And so I don't know, there's been a lot of, through all the processes, witness experts on the psychology of what happens when you are assaulted. XYZ, but there was something in me that felt like I needed to make it better in a sense.
Okay, but you texted Trevor before you met him, telling him you liked rough sex. Then you texted him after your first sexual encounter with him, which you now call an assault. And according to court records, you told him after that sexual encounter that you had, quote, never been more turned on in your life.
That's what expert witnesses are for in court in terms of the psychology behind that and responses to abuse and things like that. But like I said, I was just trying to make myself feel better about myself after what had happened the first time.
We are all sluts. You're a slut. All these dudes behind you are sluts. Your cameraman's a slut. Your PA's a slut. And your mic's a slut.
And what made you a slut?
Because I own my body. My body is not a political playground. It's not a place for legislation. It's mine and it's my future.
So you sleep around with a lot of men?
No, actually I'm a virgin.
You're a virgin?
Yeah.
So you're not a slut?
Yes, you can be a slut. Because a slut is not what you made it, Jesse. A slut is what I made it. A boss, getting money, taking the mic, turning life around, taking over Hollywood. It doesn't matter what a woman's sexual history is. A slut is just a word that you and your fellow penises made. A slut. Your mama's a slut. Your grandma's a slut. Everybody.
Is your mother a slut?
No, but yours is.
Your mother's not a slut?
No.
When you say every woman's a slut?
Everybody.
Well, why your mother's not a slut?
You are a slut. Not my mother in particular is not a slut, but a slut is a word for anybody who's owning their sexuality, turning up, and not letting Jesse twist their answers around.
So let me ask, I noticed are you dressed slutty today?
No, I'm dressed like a woman.
What made you decide to come out looking like this? You look like a slut. What made you do it?
You look like a slut.
What made you dress?
What made you dress like this?
No, just answer that question. What made you dress?
I dress like this because I can dress whatever I want to. Period.
Honestly, I feel like I'm in denial sometimes and I can't accept some of the things that I've done. There is one thing that, I tried talking to a therapist about before, something that I had to do for a scene that was really rough for me. Basically, this guy had a bowl and he like gagged me until I threw up into it, and then he like pissed in the bowl, and during the scene he asked me to drink it, and I didn't know how to say no.
Stop for life.
And I didn't know how to say no. It was one of the most disgusting, foul scenes I ever had to do. And I'm telling a therapist this, and they don't even fucking know what to say to me.
Yeah.
No one can relate. Like, no one fucking knows what to say about it.
I definitely can relate to that, just even by like working at Hooters. I know I definitely was a sex object.
Hooters? Girlfriend, you're doing a disservice, because when you walk inside Hooters for that job application, okay, Hooters is very clear.
To send their logo.
They're very clear.
Those aren't owl eyes.
They are not in the first.
Those aren't owl eyes.
Your orientation that you do whenever you work for Hooters. Some of my friends was working for Hooters. They're very clear about what they're doing. So that was a corporate choice that you made. I'm sorry. Nobody that works for Hooters was coerced, or what they know. Yeah, if you got into that job, you knew you were a sex object. That was a choice.
Also, part of feminism and part of this new age is that you can choose to be a sex object.
And it's empowerment.
You choose to get on Instagram and post your half-naked body, and everyone's supposedly supposed to accept it. Now you're saying, I worked at Hooters where I had to have my titties popping out my turtleneck, right? And you want us to feel bad. Guys, you can't have it both ways. You can't say feminism is about giving women choices and then say, well, there's a job that wants people to be sex objects and it's unacceptable. What?
I know, but they would push my limits. Like, they would just kind of like joke around at first, or like, oh,
and
I'll give you
quite
100.
touchy sometimes too, no?
Yeah, and they were like, oh, I'll give you $100 if you take off your panties for me. And I was vulnerable. I was young. I was like, oh, like no harm. Like, okay, like he just wants my panties. Like, heck yeah, $100.
We're good.
Like,
we're done, bruh.
Obviously, I don't know how like porn is shot. They don't tell you beforehand. Did they tell this guy to have to do these things, or did he just in his own brain?
This one, my
decide?
agent was actually very pissed about.
Okay.
And again, like, I'm not saying that I was.
But you were put in the spot.
I told this guy, like, yeah, I'm excited. Let's do this. I didn't know how to say no. I just wanted everyone to be happy. So
there's this thing now where they're saying, hey, if it's not an enthusiastic yes, it's a no. Her enthusiastic yes was clearly a no. Yay! It's complicated.
Because when so much money is put in front of you, you often do things that you may not feel great about after the fact. But you also have to take accountability for the fact that you accepted it. You know what I'm saying? And nobody could read your mind, right? Your values are constantly going to get tested, and what you're willing to do for money is also going to get tested. I'm not saying there's not a lot of coercive power within the industry, and there's a lot to be discussed. I agree with that. But we also have to find the balance between personal accountability and your own values and that coercive nature of the industry, right? Just because something is super tempting, you have to take accountability for the fact that you were tempted.
I am a nasty woman.
I'm really interested in these things in our age which are basically impossible demands. My favorite impossible demand is the one that you just hit on there, which is the demand that is currently just very uncomfortably in the culture in relation to the relations between the sexes, which is, women are allowed to be as sexual as they want, as sexy as they want, but must not be sexualized. And this, as I point out, is not possible. Now, does this mean that men can do whatever they want? Obviously not. Obviously not. And you see, this is one of the conversations that's so hard to have, because somebody always leaps in and goes, "Oh, I suppose you're just apologizing for rape." So you think women should be raped? No, there are gradations between total chastity and rape. But it's a sort of dementing. We don't allow ourselves to have this conversation. And my point is, none of this means that men can do what they want. But if a woman is entering the sex game by being highly sexualized. That, you know, and I'm talking about, the reason I give the Nicki Minaj example is because it's so overtly sexual. And I particularly am interested in this video of Anaconda. By the way, the Audible version of my book I read myself, and it means that I
have to read the lyrics. Oh, that is amazing.
Somebody has already put it into a video on YouTube
and cut the music over the top of it.
Yeah. The fascinating thing about this video, so what she does in Anaconda is, among other things, it's all completely sexual. I mean, just totally sexual. Just her wiggling her butt and her friends wiggling their butts, and they sometimes hit each other's butts, and they sing about each other's butts and their own butts. You get the gist. Yeah. And then, in case none of this has settled in, she then has a scene where she eats a banana, sprays her breasts with whipped cream, and licks the cream off with one of her fingers, which is also obviously impossible to interpret. And then there's this really interesting last 90 seconds or so of the video where she crawls on all fours into a sort of darkened room towards a very handsome, fit black guy in a chair, and she just does everything in front of him. It's she's all over his body. This is the thing. She's wrapping her legs around him. She's wiggling her butt in his face. It's a total predatory thing. And towards the end of this interminable scene, the guy, you can see he's starting to, and he goes eventually and touches her slightly on the side, and she whips around and smacks his hand away and walks out. And obviously the message of the video that Nicki Minaj is giving is, I can do all of this, but don't you dare think you can control the game. And this seems to me to be a dementing demand, a dementing claim, which is, apart from anything else, deeply unfair to men. And the Nicki Minaj thing is, only if I lead you all the way there and give you permission all the time, all the way. But if I'm just enjoying myself in a skimpy outfit, wiggling my butt in your face, etc., don't you even think that you still control the situation. I control it all the time, I the woman. And I think that is dementing and deeply unfair to men.
There was a line, actually, a reader sent to me, from all places, from a book about winemaking. It would be a very politically explosive thing to say in any other context, but in a book about winemaking, you can say it. And the line was, traditions are experiments that worked. And I think what we've found from having rejected all of the sexual norms and laws of the past is that they were there for a reason. And I mean, I argued very strongly in my book and in my work that the winners of the sexual revolution have not been women in general. Maybe some individuals, I think some individual men have definitely done well out of the sexual revolution, although not all men. It's a complicated story when we're talking about men and women, but I think what's clearly true is that the great losers of the sexual revolution have been children.
The CDC, I know we don't trust them, but it's fine, we'll come back to that later, came out with statistics a few months ago that in 2021, 1 in 3 teenage girls seriously contemplated taking her own life. And that's heavy. I know a teenage girl who took her own life a few weeks before her 16th birthday, longtime family friend, and I think about her regularly when I'm researching all of these issues, because she, like all of the women in our generation, are smack dab in the middle of people saying being a woman is so terrible, you should just run away from that and not be a woman, and we'll help you chop off your breasts when you're 15 years old like a Chloe Cole. You don't have to do this anymore. Being a woman is actually about being a man and singing about days of girlhood when you have a penis and you're sponsored by Tampax and you don't know what it's like to actually be a woman, but you make tens of millions of dollars on TikTok, gaining 20 million followers overnight by appropriating women's culture. That's what being a woman is for our age and our generation. Being a woman is never expecting to have the joy of connection and long-term monogamous love in a marriage or with children, because those things are evil. For you personally, that would sacrifice your career and your happiness, but also for society at large, because marriage is patriarchal and children are going to destroy the environment. And how dare you think that of your fellow man, your fellow woman? it's this horrifying time where it's genuinely impossible to be a woman. And for all of its issues that I think a lot of people had with it, the Barbie movie kind of hit that on the head. They actually said it's impossible to be a woman today. And when the best women are men in society today, that echoes throughout the halls of our entire generation.